The dust settled on Olivia Harper's boots as she stood frozen outside the Colfax Bank and Trust, clutching the deed to her father's ranch with trembling fingers while her entire world crumbled around her like sun-baked adobe. She had walked into that bank 30 minutes ago with hope burning in her chest, ready to transfer the property her father had left her into her own name, and walked out with nothing but humiliation staining her cheeks crimson and the bitter taste of injustice coating her tongue. "Your signature isn't valid, Miss Harper," the banker had said, his jowls quivering with self-importance as he peered at her over his spectacles. "A woman cannot sign legal documents without a male guardian's approval. Your father is deceased, and you have no husband. Therefore, this deed transfer cannot be processed." She had argued, pleaded, even raised her voice in a way that would have mortified her gentle mother, but Walter Grimsby had remained unmoved, his pudgy fingers drumming on his mahogany desk with infuriating patience. The other men in the bank had watched with varying degrees of sympathy and smugness, but not one had spoken up for her. Not one had challenged the banker's declaration. Now, standing in the October sunshine of 1883, Olivia wanted to scream. The Harper Ranch had been in her family for 23 years, carved out of California wilderness by her father's calloused hands and stubborn determination. She had grown up learning every inch of that land, riding the fence lines with her father, helping deliver calves in the cold spring mornings, mending broken gates until her own hands bore the same calluses his had. And now some pompous banker with soft hands and a harder heart was telling her she had no right to her own inheritance because she lacked the proper anatomy. "Madam, you all right there?" The voice was deep and warm, touched with genuine concern, and Olivia looked up into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. The man standing before her was tall, lean in the way of someone who spent long days in the saddle, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that needed a trim. He wore dusty traveling clothes and a hat pushed back on his head, revealing a face that was handsome in a rugged, lived-in sort of way. Most striking was the badge pinned to his vest, the star of a United States Marshal catching the afternoon light. "I'm fine," Olivia said automatically, then felt her composure crack. "No, actually, I'm not fine at all." The Marshal's expression shifted from polite concern to focused attention. "Name's Matthew Walsh. Just rode into town this morning, and I couldn't help but notice you looked like you'd been dealt a bad hand. Anything I can help with?" Something about his steady gaze made Olivia want to trust him, though her recent experience had left her wary of relying on any man's goodwill. Still, he was a federal marshal, sworn to uphold justice, and if ever there was an injustice that needed addressing, this was it. "The banker just told me my signature isn't valid," she said, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider. "My father died 3 months ago and left me his ranch. Everything is legal and proper, all documented and witnessed, but Walter Grimsby in there says I can't transfer the deed into my name without a male guardian's approval. I'm 24 years old, Marshal Walsh. I've been running that ranch since my father took ill, and now I'm being told I don't have the right to own what's rightfully mine." Matthew's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "Grimsby said that, did he?" Every word, and he seemed quite pleased with himself too. The Marshal was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the bank's doorway before returning to her face. "Miss Harper, if I'm understanding the situation correctly, you have a properly executed will and deed." "I do. My father had everything drawn up by a lawyer in Sacramento. It's all legal and binding." "Then Grimsby is wrong," Matthew said flatly. "California law recognizes a woman's right to own property in her own name, especially if inherited. The Married Women's Property Act has been on the books for decades. Single women have even broader rights than married ones when it comes to property ownership. That banker is either ignorant of the law or he's deliberately trying to cheat you. Hope flared in Olivia's chest, bright and almost painful. Are you certain? I'm a federal marshal, madam. Knowing the law is part of my job, and I've dealt with property disputes across 3 territories. Grimsby has no legal grounds to deny your claim. He paused, then offered her a smile that transformed his serious face into something altogether more appealing. Would you like me to go explain the situation to him? Sometimes folks need a reminder about what the law actually says. Olivia felt something shift inside her, like a door opening onto possibilities she hadn't dared imagine. This stranger, this lawman who had no obligation to help her, was offering to stand up for her rights when no one else would. I would appreciate that more than I can say, Marshal Walsh. Call me Matthew, please, and it's no trouble at all. I've got a particular dislike for folks who abuse their position to take advantage of others. He offered her his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. Shall we? They walked back into the bank together, and Olivia felt the difference immediately. Where before she had been invisible or dismissed, now heads turned and conversations stuttered to a halt. The marshal's badge commanded respect in a way her earnest pleas never could, and she felt a complicated mix of gratitude and resentment at the unfairness of it all. Walter Grimsby looked up from his desk with an expression of polite inquiry that shifted to unease when he recognized Olivia with the marshal at her side. "Can I help you, officer?" "Marshal Matthew Walsh," Matthew said pleasantly, though his eyes were hard. "I understand you've been having some trouble processing a property transfer for Miss Harper here." "It's not trouble exactly," Grimsby blustered, his jowls quivering again. "It's simply a matter of legal procedure. Miss Harper cannot sign legal documents without proper male oversight." "Is that so?" Matthew's voice remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "Then perhaps you can show me the specific California statute that requires such oversight for a single woman inheriting property from her deceased father." Grimsby's face flushed. "It's common practice, Marshal. Everyone knows that women need guidance in such complex matters." "Common practice isn't the same as law, Mr. Grimsby. The California legislature passed the Married Women's Property Act back in 1850, and it's been amended several times since to expand women's property rights. An unmarried woman over the age of 18 has the legal right to own, inherit, and manage property in her own name without requiring any man's permission or approval." Matthew leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. "Now, you can either process Miss Harper's deed transfer right now, following the actual law, or I can send a wire to the Federal District Court in Sacramento asking them to investigate why a banker in Colfax is denying a citizen her legal rights. Your choice." The silence in the bank was absolute. Olivia could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could feel the eyes of every man in the room fixed on this confrontation. Grimsby's face had gone from red to pale, and his fingers trembled slightly as they drummed on his desk. "I may have been mistaken about the legal requirements," Grimsby finally said, the words clearly bitter on his tongue. "If you'll give me the deed, Miss Harper, I'll process the transfer immediately." Victory should have tasted sweet, but Olivia found it tangled up with anger and humiliation. She had been right all along, had known her claim was just, and yet it had taken a man's authority to make another man listen. Still, she wasn't foolish enough to let pride stand in the way of securing her inheritance. She handed over the deed with steady hands. The transfer took less than 20 minutes, all the paperwork signed and stamped and recorded in the official ledger. When it was done, Olivia held the deed bearing her name alone, Olivia Harper, sole proprietor of the Harper Ranch, and felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Grimsby," she said with cold politeness, then turned and walked out into the sunshine with her head held high. Matthew followed her out, and when they were far enough from the bank to speak privately, Olivia turned to him with emotion threatening to overflow. "How can I ever thank you? Without your help, I would have lost everything." "You wouldn't have lost it," Matthew corrected gently. "You might have had to fight harder and longer, maybe get a lawyer involved, but the law was on your side. I just helped speed things along. You did more than that. You made him listen when he wouldn't hear a word I said." Olivia blinked hard against the tears. "I've been running that ranch for the last year while my father was dying, keeping everything together, and yet men like Grimsby think I'm not capable of signing my own name to a piece of paper." Matthew's expression softened with understanding and something that might have been admiration. "I've met plenty of men who couldn't run a successful ranch if their lives depended on it, and I'm guessing you're better at it than most. The law might be on your side, Miss Harper, but that doesn't mean everyone will respect it. Some folks need reminding." They stood there in the street, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders, and Olivia found herself studying the Marshal with new curiosity. He wore his authority comfortably but without arrogance, and there was a decency in his face that made her want to trust him. "Are you staying in Colfax long, Marshal?" "I hadn't planned on it. Just passing through on my way to Sacramento." He paused, his blue eyes searching her face. "Though I suppose I could stay a day or two. Make sure Grimsby doesn't try to cause you any more trouble." Olivia knew she should thank him politely and let him go about his business. She had her deed, her ranch was secure, and she didn't need anyone's protection. But she heard herself say, "Would you like to see the ranch? It's about 5 miles outside town, and I'd like to properly thank you for your help. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage a decent dinner." Something flickered in Matthew's eyes, warm and interested. "I'd like that very much, Miss Harper." "Olivia," she corrected, matching his earlier informality. "If you're going to rescue me from corrupt bankers, we might as well be on a first-name basis." His smile transformed his face again, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Olivia it is." They collected his horse from the livery where he'd stabled it that morning, and Olivia untied her own mare from the hitching post outside the general store. As they rode out of Colfax together, Olivia felt something unfurling in her chest, fragile and hopeful and utterly unexpected. She had spent the last 3 months consumed with grief and worry, fighting to keep the ranch running while dealing with her father's death, and she hadn't allowed herself to feel anything beyond determination and exhaustion. Now, riding beside this stranger who had stood up for her when no one else would, she felt the first stirrings of something that might have been happiness. The Harper Ranch spread out before them as they crested the last hill, and Olivia watched Matthew's face as he took in the view. The ranch house was modest but well built, painted white with green shutters and a wide porch that caught the afternoon shade. The barn and outbuildings were in good repair, the fences mended and straight, the pastures dotted with cattle bearing her father's brand. It wasn't the biggest spread in California, but it was prosperous and well run, and she was fiercely proud of it. "This is beautiful," Matthew said, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice. "Your father built something worth being proud of." "We built it together," Olivia said softly. "My mother died when I was 12, and after that it was just the two of us. He taught me everything about running a ranch, never treated me like I was less capable just because I was a girl." Her voice caught. "That's why it hurt so much when Grimsby said my signature wasn't valid. My father trusted me with all of this, and some banker who never got his hands dirty a day in his life thinks he knows better." Matthew reached over and touched her hand briefly, a gesture of comfort that sent warmth racing up her arm. Your father was right to trust you. Anyone can see you've kept this place running beautifully." They rode down to the ranch house, and Olivia's hired hand, a grizzled old cowboy named Pete who had worked for her father for 15 years, came out to meet them. His weathered face creased with concern when he saw her expression. "Miss Olivia, everything all right with the deed?" "It is now," Olivia said, dismounting and handing him her reins. "Pete, this is Marshal Matthew Walsh. He helped convince Mr. Grimsby to follow the actual law instead of his own prejudices." "Matthew, Pete Morrison has been with us since the beginning. He's the best ranch hand in California." Pete shook Matthew's hand with a grip that was still iron-strong despite his age. "Pleased to meet you, Marshal, and grateful for what you did. I would have gone into that bank myself if I'd known they were giving Miss Olivia trouble, but she didn't want me causing a scene." "I'm glad I could help," Matthew said warmly. "You've got a fine ranch here." "That we do, and Miss Olivia's the reason it's still running smooth. Her father knew what he was doing when he left it to her." Pete's voice was fierce with loyalty, and Olivia felt her throat tighten with affection for the old cowboy. She showed Matthew around the ranch as the afternoon softened into evening, pointing out the cattle in the far pastures, the creek that never ran dry even in the hottest summers, the stand of oak trees where she and her father used to sit and plan the future. Matthew listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions that showed he knew his way around ranch life. He had grown up in Texas, he told her, on a spread not unlike this one, before the war came and changed everything. "My father fought for the Confederacy," Matthew said, his voice carrying old pain. "He didn't own slaves and didn't believe in the cause, but Texas was his home and he felt obligated. He died at Shiloh when I was 14. My mother tried to keep the ranch going, but between the war damage and the debts, we lost everything. That's why I became a lawman, I suppose. I saw what happened when people couldn't get justice, when the powerful could take from the weak without consequence." "I'm sorry," Olivia said softly. "Losing your father so young must have been devastating." "It was, but it taught me something important. It taught me that the law matters, that justice matters, and that someone has to be willing to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult." He looked at her with those steady blue eyes. "That's why I couldn't walk past you today without offering help. I know what it's like to watch everything you love slip away because of someone else's greed or prejudice." They had stopped by the creek, the water burbling softly over smooth stones while the evening light painted everything gold. Olivia felt something shift between them, the easy companionship of the afternoon deepening into something more intimate and charged with possibility. "You're a good man, Matthew Walsh," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. "I try to be," he replied. "Though I'll admit, my motivations this afternoon weren't entirely altruistic. I saw a beautiful woman who'd been wronged, and I wanted to be the one who made it right." Olivia felt heat climb her cheeks, but she held his gaze. "So you make a habit of rescuing damsels in distress?" "Not usually, no. But something about you made me want to help. Maybe it was the fire in your eyes when you were trying not to cry, or the way you held that deed like it was the most precious thing in the world." He smiled, and it was the warmest, most genuine smile she'd ever seen. "Or maybe I just recognized a kindred spirit, someone who fights for what's theirs and doesn't give up even when the odds are stacked against them." "I don't feel very fierce right now," Olivia admitted. "Mostly I feel tired and grateful and a little bit hopeful, which is more than I've felt in months." "Hopeful is good," Matthew said softly. "I could use some hope myself." They stood there as the sun sank lower, painting the California sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, and Olivia realized she didn't want this day to end. She didn't want Matthew to ride away in the morning, headed for Sacramento and whatever justice he was pursuing. She wanted him to stay, wanted to learn everything about him, wanted to explore this connection that had sprung up between them like water from a hidden spring. But she was also practical, raised on hard work and clear thinking, and she knew that wanting something didn't make it sensible or possible. Matthew had his own life, his own duties, and she had a ranch to run. One afternoon of kindness didn't mean anything beyond that single moment, no matter how much her heart might wish otherwise. "I should start dinner," she said, breaking the spell. "You must be hungry after a long day of traveling and fighting bankers." They walked back to the house together, and Olivia busied herself in the kitchen while Matthew sat at the worn wooden table and told her stories about his work as a marshal. He had a gift for narrative, painting vivid pictures of the places he'd been and the people he'd met, and Olivia found herself laughing for the first time since her father's death. Genuine laughter that came from deep in her belly and left her breathless. The dinner was simple but good. Beef stew made from her own cattle and vegetables from the garden her mother had planted years ago. They ate by lamplight, the conversation flowing easily between them, and Olivia felt herself relaxing in a way she hadn't allowed herself to in months. With Matthew, she didn't have to be strong or stoic or constantly vigilant. She could just be herself, and that was enough. "Tell me about your father," Matthew said as they cleared the dishes. "What was he like?" Olivia smiled, though it came with the familiar ache of loss. "He was stubborn and kind and completely devoted to this land. He believed that hard work could overcome anything, that if you were just persistent enough and smart enough and willing enough, you could build something lasting. And he did. He came out here in 1860 with nothing but a wagon full of supplies and a head full of dreams, and he built all of this." She gestured at the house around them. "He met my mother in San Francisco when he went there to buy cattle. She was a shopkeeper's daughter, and everyone said she was crazy to marry a rancher and move out to the middle of nowhere, but she loved him and she loved this place. They were happy together, truly happy, until she got sick. And after she died, it was just you and your father, just us. He could have remarried. There were plenty of women who would have been happy to be Mrs. Harper, but he said he'd already had his great love and didn't need another. So he poured everything into the ranch and into teaching me. Some people thought it was strange, the way he raised me more like a son than a daughter, but he said capability mattered more than gender." Her voice thickened with emotion. "He would have been so angry about what happened at the bank today. He would have marched in there and given Grimsby a piece of his mind. But you handled it," Matthew said firmly. "You didn't give up, and you found a way to get what was rightfully yours. That's what he taught you, and that's what matters." Olivia looked at him across the table, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was praying, and felt her heart do something complicated and wonderful in her chest. "Will you really stay a few days? Make sure there's no more trouble." "I'll stay as long as you need me," Matthew said, and the promise in his voice made her believe him completely. He slept in the bunkhouse with Pete that night, and Olivia lay awake in her own bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering what she was doing. She had known this man for less than a day, and yet she felt drawn to him in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had never been the kind of woman who let her heart rule her head, had always been practical and sensible. But there was nothing practical about the way she felt when Matthew smiled at her. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Matthew proved himself handy with ranch work, helping Pete mend a section of fence that had been damaged in a recent storm. Olivia watched him work, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, his movements economical and efficient, and felt desire stir low in her belly. She wanted those hands on her, wanted to know what his kiss tasted like, wanted things she had never allowed herself to want before. They spent the day working side by side, and with every passing hour, Olivia felt the connection between them strengthening. Matthew was easy to talk to, easy to be around, and she found herself sharing stories and dreams she had never told anyone else. He listened with complete attention, asked thoughtful questions, and shared his own hopes and regrets with an honesty that made her trust him even more. On the third day, as they rode out to check on the cattle in the far pasture, Matthew finally brought up what they had both been avoiding. "I should be heading to Sacramento soon," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I've got business there that can't wait much longer." Olivia's heart clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "Of course. You've already done more than enough for me. I can't expect you to put your own work on hold indefinitely." "Olivia." He reined in his horse and waited for her to do the same, then reached over and took her hand. "I don't want to leave. These past few days have been some of the best I've had in years. Being here with you, working on this ranch, it feels right in a way nothing has felt right for a long time." "Then stay," she said, the words escaping before she could consider them. "Stay and help me run this place. God knows I could use an extra pair of hands, and Pete's not getting any younger." Matthew's expression was pained. "I want to. You have no idea how much I want to. But I'm a federal marshal, Olivia. I have responsibilities, cases I'm working on, people depending on me. I can't just walk away from all of that." "I'm not asking you to walk away from anything," Olivia said, though her heart was breaking. "I understand duty and responsibility. I've built my whole life around them. I just thought maybe there could be room for something else too." He dismounted and helped her down from her mare, then pulled her into his arms with a desperation that matched her own. "There is room. God, Olivia, there's so much room, but I need to figure out how to make this work. Let me go to Sacramento, finish the case I'm working on, and then I'll come back. I'll talk to my superiors about getting assigned to this region, somewhere close enough that I can be here when you need me." "And if they say no?" Olivia asked against his chest, breathing in the scent of him, leather and soap and something uniquely Matthew. "Then I'll resign my commission. I've been a lawman for 10 years, and it's given me purpose and direction, but it's also been lonely. Being here with you, I realize what I've been missing. I want a home, Olivia. I want someone to come back to at the end of the day. I want what my parents had before the war took it all away." He pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "I want you if you'll have me." Olivia felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I want you too. I didn't think I had room in my life for anything beyond keeping this ranch running, but you've shown me I was wrong. I want to share this place with someone who understands what it means to me. I want to build something lasting, the way my parents did." Matthew kissed her then, slow and sweet and full of promise, and Olivia felt herself falling into it completely. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than demanding, and she answered with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. "I'll come back," he promised. "Even if I have to ride all night, even if I have to quit my job and walk back here, I will come back to you." "I'll be waiting," Olivia said. "This ranch isn't going anywhere, and neither am I." They rode back to the house in companionable silence, hands occasionally brushing, and Olivia tried to memorize everything about this moment. The way the sun felt on her shoulders, the sound of the horses' hooves on the packed earth, the expression on Matthew's face when he looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. That evening, they sat on the porch and watched the sun set, and Matthew told her about the case that was waiting for him in Sacramento. A group of land speculators had been defrauding homesteaders, using forged documents and corrupt officials to steal property rights. It was exactly the kind of injustice that made his blood boil, the powerful preying on the vulnerable. "It's not so different from what Grimsby tried to do to you," Matthew said, "using legal technicalities and social prejudices to take what doesn't belong to them. That's why I can't just walk away, not yet. These families are depending on me to make sure justice is done." "I understand," Olivia said, and she did. "Go to Sacramento, finish what you started, and then come back to me. I'll be here." He left the next morning, and Olivia stood on the porch with her arms wrapped around herself, watching until he disappeared over the hill. Pete came to stand beside her, his weathered face sympathetic. "That's a good man, Miss Olivia. If he says he'll come back, he will." "I know," she said softly. "I just wish he didn't have to go at all." The days turned into weeks, and Olivia threw herself into ranch work with renewed determination. She and Pete brought the cattle down from the high pastures as the weather turned colder, repaired the roof on the barn, and laid in supplies for winter. Every evening she sat at her father's old desk and wrote letters to Matthew, telling him about her day, sharing her thoughts and dreams, and counting down the time until she would see him again. His letters came regularly, carried by the weekly mail coach, and Olivia treasured every word. He wrote about his investigation, the progress he was making, the obstacles he was facing. But mostly he wrote about missing her, about counting the days until he could ride back to the Harper ranch and never leave again. 2 months after he left, a letter came that made Olivia's heart soar. Matthew had closed his case successfully. All the corrupt officials were facing charges, and the stolen properties had been returned to their rightful owners. More importantly, he had spoken with his superiors about transferring to California, and they had agreed to assign him to the Northern District with headquarters in Sacramento. He would be responsible for covering a large territory that included Colfax, which meant he could base himself at the ranch and ride out when duty called. "I'm coming home," he wrote. "I'll be there by the 1st of December, and if you'll still have me, I'd like to talk about making our arrangement permanent. I love you, Olivia Harper, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Olivia read the letter 3 times, her vision blurring with happy tears, then clutched it to her chest and laughed with pure joy. Pete found her like that, standing in the middle of the kitchen with tears streaming down her face and a smile that could have lit up the entire ranch. "Good news, I take it?" he asked with a grin. "The best news," Olivia confirmed. "He's coming back, Pete. He's really coming back." The 1st of December arrived cold and bright, and Olivia woke before dawn with nervous energy singing through her veins. She dressed carefully in her best dress, the deep green wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and tried to tame her hair into something approaching ladylike. Pete had offered to ride into town to meet the afternoon coach, but Olivia couldn't wait that long. She saddled her mare and rode out to meet Matthew herself, her heart pounding with anticipation. She saw him coming from a mile away, sitting tall in the saddle with his hat pushed back, and a pack horse trailing behind him laden with supplies. When he spotted her, he urged his horse into a gallop, and she did the same, meeting him halfway with a collision that was equal parts joyful and reckless. Matthew swept her up before she could dismount, kissing her with an enthusiasm that made her dizzy and breathless and completely unconcerned about propriety. When he finally set her down, both of them were grinning like fools. "You're really here," Olivia said, touching his face to make sure he was solid and real. "I'm really here, and I'm not going anywhere," Matthew confirmed. He reached into his saddle bag and pulled out a small wooden box, then dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the dusty road. "Olivia Harper, I know we haven't known each other long, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are strong and brave and beautiful, and I want to spend every day learning new things about you. Will you marry me?" Olivia didn't hesitate, didn't second-guess or worry about practicality. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet and kissing him again. "Yes, absolutely yes." The ring was simple and perfect, a gold band with a small sapphire that matched the California sky. It had belonged to his grandmother, Matthew told her, the only thing he had salvaged when his family lost their ranch. He had been carrying it with him for years, waiting for the right woman to give it to. They rode back to the ranch together, and Pete met them at the door with a knowing smile. "About time you got here, Marshal. Miss Olivia's been pacing holes in the floor waiting for you." "I haven't been pacing," Olivia protested, but she was too happy to put much force behind it. Matthew moved his belongings into the ranch house that very day, claiming the bedroom that had been her father's with a reverence that made Olivia love him even more. That evening, they sat down with Pete and made plans for the future. Matthew would continue his work as a marshal, but the ranch would be his home base. During busy seasons, he would help with the ranch work, and when duty called him away, Pete would help Olivia keep things running smoothly. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Colfax, with Pete standing up as witness and most of the town in attendance. Walter Grimsby had the grace to look ashamed when he saw them, and Olivia accepted his grudging congratulations with more politeness than he deserved. She was too happy to hold grudges, too focused on the future she was building with Matthew to dwell on past injustices. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, everything Olivia had dreamed of and more. Matthew was patient and gentle, making sure she felt loved and cherished, and when they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Afterwards, lying in his arms with the moonlight streaming through the window, Olivia felt a sense of peace and completeness she had never known before. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Matthew replied, his arms tightening around her. "Thank you for taking a chance on a wandering lawman with more ideals than sense. Thank you for making a banker listen to the law," Olivia said with a smile, "and for seeing me as capable instead of helpless." "You were never helpless," Matthew said firmly. "You just needed someone to back you up, the same way I'll always back you up from now on. We're partners, Olivia. In everything." The winter passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Matthew proved himself a capable rancher, bringing skills learned in his Texas childhood to the California operation. He was also an excellent marshal, fair and thorough in his investigations, and the people in his territory quickly learned to respect and trust him. Whenever he rode out on business, Olivia ran the ranch with Pete's help, and whenever he returned home, usually dusty and tired and grateful, she was waiting with open arms. Spring brought new calves and longer days, and one morning in late April, Olivia woke feeling queasy and strange. It took her a week to recognize the signs and another week to work up the courage to tell Matthew. She found him in the barn, mending tack, and the words tumbled out in a nervous rush. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." Matthew dropped the bridle he'd been working on and crossed the space between them in 3 long strides, sweeping her up and spinning her around with a whoop of joy that startled the horses. "Are you sure? When? How are you feeling?" Olivia laughed, dizzy and deliriously happy. "I'm sure. Probably due in early December. And I'm feeling wonderful now that the morning sickness is passing." They stood there in the barn, holding each other and marveling at the miracle of new life, and Olivia felt her happiness overflow. She had everything she had ever wanted and things she hadn't known to dream of. A home, a husband who loved and respected her, a future full of possibility. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Olivia worked the ranch right up until the last month, ignoring Matthew's worried protests. "I'm pregnant, not fragile," she told him whenever he tried to coddle her. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, and most of them while doing a lot more work than I am." Still, as the due date approached, Matthew became increasingly protective, hovering over her with an anxiety that was both endearing and occasionally irritating. When her labor started on a cold December night, he nearly wore a hole in the floor pacing while the midwife from town attended to Olivia in the bedroom. Their son was born just before dawn, healthy and loud and perfect. Matthew held him with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face, looking between the baby and Olivia with wonder. "He's beautiful," Matthew whispered. "You're both beautiful. Thank you for this gift." They named him Marcus James, after both their fathers, and he proved to be a happy, easy baby who seemed to take ranch life in stride. Olivia marveled at the way motherhood changed her, adding new dimensions to her sense of self without diminishing the woman she had always been. She was still the owner and operator of a successful ranch, still the woman who had fought for her rights and won. But now she was also a mother, nurturing new life with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else. 2 years later, their daughter was born, a tiny thing with her mother's determination and her father's blue eyes. They named her Margaret Rose after Olivia's mother, and Marcus took his role as big brother with endearing seriousness. The years flowed past like water in their creek, steady and life-giving. The ranch prospered under their joint management, expanding gradually as they bought adjacent parcels from neighbors who were ready to retire. Matthew's reputation as a fair and honest lawman grew, and he was eventually promoted to chief marshal for the Northern District. But he never let his work take him away from his family for longer than necessary, always coming home to the ranch and the people who loved him. Pete stayed on until he was too old to work, and they built him a small cottage near the main house where he could live out his remaining years in comfort. He died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch with a simple marker that read, "Pete Morrison, loyal friend and true cowboy." Olivia and Matthew grew old together, weathering droughts and economic downturns, celebrating births and mourning deaths, building something lasting and true. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Matthew took her back to the spot where they had first kissed by the creek, now a well-worn path that their children and grandchildren used regularly. "You ever regret it?" he asked, his hair now shot through with silver but his eyes still that impossible blue. "Tying yourself to a lawman who's gone half the time." Olivia laughed and took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "Not for a single moment." "You gave me more than just help with a corrupt banker, Matthew. You gave me partnership and respect and a love that sustained me through everything. I regret nothing except maybe not kissing you sooner that first day." "I was trying to be professional," Matthew protested with a grin. "You were a woman in distress, and I was a federal officer. There are rules about that sort of thing. Rules you broke thoroughly and repeatedly once we were alone," Olivia teased. "Not that I'm complaining." They stood by the creek in the golden afternoon light, two people who had built a life together from chance and courage and stubborn determination. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and beautiful, worked now by their son Marcus and his wife while Matthew and Olivia settled into the role of advisors and doting grandparents. Their daughter Margaret had followed in her father's footsteps, becoming one of the first female lawyers in California. She visited regularly with her husband and children, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter and the chaotic joy of family. Olivia was fiercely proud of both her children, grateful that they had grown up in a world where their capabilities mattered more than their gender, though she knew that fight was far from over. As the sun set on another day, painting the California sky in shades of fire and gold, Matthew pulled Olivia close and kissed her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding night 30 years before. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, "for saying yes, for building this life with me, for being my partner in everything." "Thank you," Olivia replied, "for hearing my voice when no one else would, for standing up for what was right, for loving me exactly as I am." They walked back to the house hand in hand, their shadows stretching long across the land they had nurtured together. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, Marcus calling everyone in for dinner, the normal sounds of a family going about their evening routines. It was everything Olivia's father had dreamed of when he first claimed this land, everything her mother had hoped for when she chose love over comfort. The Harper Ranch would continue for generations, passed down through children who understood that land was more than property, that home was built on respect and partnership, that justice mattered and love endured. And at the heart of it all was a story that began with injustice and ended with triumph, with a woman who refused to be silenced, and a man who made sure the law heard her voice. That night, lying in bed with Matthew's arms around her, and the sound of their family settling in for sleep echoing through the house, Olivia thought back to that October day in 1883, when she had stood outside the bank feeling like her world was ending. She had been so young then, so alone and frightened despite her brave front. She could never have imagined the life that was waiting for her, the love that would transform everything. Walter Grimsby had tried to tell her that her signature wasn't valid, that she had no voice in determining her own future. But Matthew had helped her prove him wrong, and together, they had built something more lasting than any deed or legal document. They had built a family, a legacy, a love story that would be told around ranch house tables for generations to come. Outside, the California stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, the same stars that had guided her father west all those years ago, the same stars that would guide her grandchildren into futures she could only imagine. The land endured, the ranch prospered, and love triumphed over every obstacle. It was enough. It was everything. And as Olivia drifted off to sleep in the arms of the man who had changed her life with a simple act of justice, she smiled and whispered one more thank you to the universe that had brought them together. Matthew heard her and smiled into the darkness, his own heart full of gratitude for the day he had decided to stop and help a beautiful, fierce woman standing outside a bank with fire in her eyes and determination in every line of her body. He had thought he was just doing his job as a marshal, upholding the law and protecting the vulnerable. Instead, he had found his home, his heart, his reason for everything. They had built this life together, one day at a time, one decision at a time, one act of love at a time. And it would endure long after they were gone, a testament to what was possible when two people refused to accept injustice and chose, instead, to fight for what was right and true and lasting. The Harper Ranch slept under the California stars, safe and secure and full of love, exactly as it was always meant to be.